what I'm hoping to do is give a general overview of how the whole thing fits together, and equally importantly, why, so that you can get a handle on how to get the most out of the system. Because I do appreciate that the way the system is set up, when you sign up, it kind of guides you down various paths depending on what you say. And I appreciate that often people struggle then to take the step back and say, give me the big picture overview of how this all fits together. So hopefully we're going to achieve that today. Hopefully you can all see my screen as well with the sort of chessboard pieces on. Yeah, so I'm going to do a little bit of talking up front, and then we're going to dive straight into the app and leave some time for questions afterwards as well. So, right, I wanted to start with a story, because everyone says when you're doing a presentation, always start with a story, right? So I thought I'd do that. And I'm going to go all the way back to my high school career, where I learned double entry bookkeeping. Did anyone here learn double entry bookkeeping? Okay, yeah, a couple of people learned double entry bookkeeping. I mean, it seemed an eminently sensible thing to do, because of course, every business has got to keep books, and the only way to keep books, well, there's the sort of mafia double set of book keeping way, but the only way to keep books is double entry bookkeeping, so it made sense to know about it. So I went through learning the whole process of, you had the specially ruled paper, and you had to fill in the transactions, both sides of the transactions, and then you had to add up all the numbers at the bottom, and you had to take the totals and transfer them into the financial statements, add up all the financial statements, and with any luck, your balance sheet would balance at the end of that. And of course, being a schoolboy accountant, my balance sheet, I don't think anyone at school's balance sheet ever balanced, right? I mean, it was a real nightmare to do this. And I thought, well, here's job security for life, because once you go into this is a schoolboy exercise. Once you go into a large company in the wild, no one's ever going to get anything to add up, and they'll be employing accountants for life to sort this mess out. But of course, by the time I got into the business world, no one did double entry. Well, they still did double entry bookkeeping, but no one used a pen and paper and the lined pages, because it had all been computerized. So the transactions would flow directly through the source systems. The computers would add everything up for you. So, they never misadded. They would transfer all the balances onto the financial statements. And lo and behold, your balance sheet always balanced, as if by magic. And I thought, well, that's rather inconvenient now, because this is what I've studied, and we're not doing it anymore. But luckily, as it turns out, the understanding of how accounting and finance works that you got was just as applicable. In fact, possibly more valuable now, because now that the basic mechanics of the whole exercise were properly taken care of, all of the accountants were focused on financial analysis and financial planning and tax planning, and much more higher value add things, which of course also, as it turns out, is much more interesting than writing down and adding up lots of columns of figures. So it turned out pretty well for the accountants. As my career progressed, of course, as you all know, I got into the realm of business strategy, and I quickly worked out that as strategists, we were way behind the accountants, right? Most strategists can't even agree how to draw the lines on the page, right? Everyone's running around with different models of frameworks and different interpretations of what's important and why. Absolutely nothing is standardized. And as a result, as strategists, I think we probably spend as much time arguing about how to do strategy as we do actually doing it. And so unsurprisingly, when you go into a lot of organizations, a lot of people are frankly a little bit skeptical about this whole business strategy malarkey, and whether it really adds value, and whether it's just an intellectual exercise. Of course, the accountants have gone on. Again, going back to when I was learning accounting, most organizations would only close their books once a year. So it was only really at the end of the year, or maybe at the end of the month, for parts of the information, that you actually got a picture of what was happening in your business. And you usually got that picture about 3 months after the year ended. Whereas nowadays, of course, because the systems are so fluid and so flawless, you get that information pretty much in real time. So you can run your business on a real-time basis. And of course, going back to us as strategists with our slightly more complicated exercises, we still have so many organizations who think we can't do strategic planning more than once every 3 years or maybe once a year because it's just too complicated. And it stops being a real-time part of the way you run the business and becomes a side exercise. So the challenge I saw for StratNav app was how to get from, on the one side here, we've got this sort of ad hoc, periodic, episodic type process, right, that happens at various intervals. And we want to make it a regular and repeatable, scalable, even perhaps a continuous process, right? We want to move away from having a disparate bunch of disconnected templates that you downloaded from the internet, which is what most people use, to an integrated suite of tools that can drive insight and action. We want to move away from general purpose office software like Word and PowerPoint and Miro and Mural, if you're very modern these days, software that doesn't know what you're doing and can't help you do it. We want to move towards purpose-built software that understands what you're doing, understands the nature of the information required, and can guide you and support it with automation and, dare I say, given Graham's comment earlier, even perhaps with some AI. Right? And then that'll enable us to move from strategy as an event, which results in the production of some static documents that sit in your inbox, clogging things up until you get to next year's event, to a live system that can help you manage and coordinate and drive actions on an ongoing basis. Again, sort of moving up the ladder, that'll take strategy from something that you have to take time out of your day to do, to something that's part of the way you run the business. So you're running the business by thinking and acting more strategically, not running the business most of the year and then going and thinking about strategy for a couple of days a year. And lastly, that'll take us from fragmented strategies, resulting in a lack of alignment, to a single source of truth about your strategy that's always up to date, always aligned, and always driving you forward. So that's what we set out to do. And the process we went through to do it is, I think of it roughly in 4 steps. So the first step was to replicate what we were doing. So, this is the equivalent of the accountants putting the lined paper online. So we need to say, what are all the models and frameworks that we use for doing strategy with? And can we put them online, make them digital, and put them onto a central repository so that we have a central repository for our strategy rather than a bunch of documents and disconnected papers floating around. Once you've done that, you can then integrate all of that content. So you can look at, for example, a lot of the models overlap with each other. They cover the same material. So you can deduplicate those overlaps. You can identify the linkages between the model that the logic of your strategy flows through from the one model to the next. And you can ensure that things are always consistent. And you'd be surprised how often I go into organizations where they've done lots of strategy work, but none of it joins up. It's used different language. I went into an organization that didn't even know how many key strategic initiatives they had, because depending on who you asked, you got a different list. It was so inconsistent. So the second step is to integrate it all. The third step is, once you have it integrated, you can start automating it, right? You can start getting the system to look at how things fit together, generating reports, doing analysis, making the process more collaborative, managing your stakeholders for you. You can start to automate some of the grunt work of it. And that to me is the equivalent of, in the accounting system, the software adds up the column of numbers. You no longer need to do that because everyone knows that that's a column of numbers and it needs a total at the bottom. So the computer just does it for you. And then the fourth phase of that is one that we're increasingly focused on at the moment, is adding intelligence. And we've had machine learning in StratNav app for quite a while, used mainly for categorization of things and establishing linkages between things. But as I'm sure you all know, the capabilities for natural language processing and generative AI have just really opened up over the last really only 12 months, I think, actually. In fact, less than 12 months. And so we're starting to build that kind of capability, that those kind of smarts into the strategy process, again, to do some of the basic heavy lifting so that, like the accountants, we can focus on the value add stuff, right? The stuff that really makes a difference, the stuff that really generates the insight about the business. Okay, so in summary, StratNav app is taking us from this old way of working where you've got a bunch of disconnected, disparate information on which your strategy relies, and it's all held together by individual people's brains, right? It takes a person to understand how the information in all of those Word documents and PowerPoint documents and Excel documents and emails, a person needs to understand how it all fits together. So the person, if you like, becomes the weakest link, the single point of failure, having to do a lot of work to keep the show on the road. And what we want to do is we want to move to an organized, structured approach where the person doesn't have to worry about all of that detail and keeping it organized and structured and properly interrelated, because that's all taken care of for them. The person only has to worry about the stuff that the machine really can't do, right? The spark of insight that makes a strategy really exciting, the innovation and the novelty that makes the strategy exciting. So hopefully we will free people up to do more of that and enable a lot more actual strategic thinking to happen. Last slide, and then we're going to dive in, right? I always like to finish on this, right? You could run your accounting and finance process in PowerPoint. You could run your policy administration system. You could run your customer contact center. You could run your human resource. You could do it all in PowerPoint. You'd be crazy. Your business would collapse in an untidy heap. So why do so many organizations think it's okay then to run their strategy, probably one of the most important and complex and involved processes, to run your strategy using nothing more than general office tools? So I'm going to try and give you an overview. Now, I'm not going to be able to, in the time that we've got here, tell you everything that the system can do. That would just be impossible to get into that level of detail and probably bore you all to tears. But what I hope to do is give you enough of an oversight and a way for you to make sure you can get comfortable with exploring it yourselves and knowing you're getting the right kind of output. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the strategy board, right? Which, if you like, is the central organizing principle for a strategy in StratNav app. And it's based on thinking about strategy as 4 phases, if you like. I say phases, but as you'll see, they're represented in a circular manner for reasons which I'll explain just now. But it's essentially 4 phases and 4 different types of activity that you need to master in order to develop and execute strategy. Represented in the circle, there's some stuff in the middle, which I'll come to in a short while. You may actually see the layout of this particular screen may vary, because we're constantly A/B testing different presentations of this, but it will look something like this. You will recognize it, don't worry. So the 4 phases are, I always start with the analysis phase, and the way I would sum up the analysis phase is the job that you're trying to do there is to develop a rich and shared analysis of the organization and its competitive environment. Okay, because strategy as a collaborative exercise, if you can't agree on the premise of what you're dealing with, you're never going to agree on what the strategy is, right? Even if you thought you knew what the strategy is. So absolutely critical that you develop that shared understanding. And you will see a number of models here, a number of modules for understanding how the business works, how it adds value, using things like business model canvas, enhanced business model canvas, Porter's value chain. We've got the lean canvas in there if you're a very early startup. So that's to understand, what is this business and how does it actually work? Then we've got a number of modules for generating and organizing the strategic insights about that. So those are things like your SWOT, your PESTLE, your Porter's 5 Forces, your McKinsey 7S, all frameworks for processing the strategic insights. We've got a competitor analysis module, which includes the Blue Ocean strategy canvas. We've got some portfolio tools, so sort of Pareto analysis and Boston Consulting Matrix tools for looking at businesses which are made up of multiple products or lines of product or service. And then we've got a scenario planning module, which looks at how all of this comes together to help you imagine different ways in which the future could pan out. So all of those, and we'll dive into it a little bit just now, but all of those are about building that shared understanding so that you can say, right, now that we agree on the problem that we're trying to solve for here, how do we move forward? So the direction module, which the next one, is the bit about working out, given that analysis, where is it that you think this organization wants to or needs to go? And you'll see there's mission statements, vision statements, corporate values. The key part here is probably strategic goals, setting your strategic goals. And in particular, we like to use the balanced scorecard framework is built into this. So you set your strategic goals to achieve your financial, customer, business process, and innovation and growth capabilities within the organization to create the future that you want. The third module in here, the planning module, is where we start to look at what strategic initiatives are we going to pursue in order to achieve those goals. So if you think of the direction as the what it is that you're aiming to achieve, think of the planning module as the what are you going to do, or the how you're going to achieve that. And we can have a look later. There are a number of different views that you can take to look at those modules across various those initiatives across the various dimensions. And then the last one that we have is strategic scorecard, the bit that everyone seems to forget for some reason. They do the strategy, everyone goes away and celebrates until next year, and they come back next year and they say, hey guys, nothing changed. Where did we go wrong? So the strategic scorecard is about tracking, not only did we do what we said we were going to do, which is obviously important, but even more importantly, did it have the effect that we anticipated it would have? And that's why it's a circle, because if the answer to that second question is no, it didn't, then it means that you misunderstood something in your analysis. Now, it may be that you couldn't have understood that because the information wasn't available. So it may be you've only now learned what it is that you needed to know to feed back in. But that doesn't matter. You would still feed that new understanding back into your analysis, and you'd go around the loop again. In the middle, we've got some governance things. So we've got a big emphasis on stakeholder management within the platform. Obviously, at the end of the day, strategy is about thinking, it's about thinking about stuff and doing stuff, and it's stakeholders who think about stuff and do stuff. So you better be focused on who those stakeholders are and how they're involved in this. It's got a meeting management module. Much as we hate meetings, most work gets done. That's when people get together, whether it's a one-to-one meeting or a large group meeting or a workshop. That's when progress happens. You get together and you talk about something and you reach an agreement. So we've got that built in. I think the value about using the meetings module in StratNav app as opposed to anywhere else, because obviously other people will give you meeting management tools. If you do it in StratNav app, you can link those meetings to the parts of the strategy that you were discussing. So if you get to somewhere in the strategy and you say, well, how did we come to this? It'll actually tell you, well, you discussed it in these meetings, and here's the progress you made to get to this point, and here's the people who were there and what they said at each of those. And then just from a general project management discipline, we've got this RAID kind of approach: risks, actions, issues, and decisions. And that's the part of it that I like to think as sort of a getting things done. If people remember, the GTD acronym seems to have fallen out of favor a bit. But it's the bit that says, okay, we better actually do some stuff. We better make some decisions and do some actions and manage some risks, etc. So that's the sort of sharp end of actually getting stuff done. And again, because it's baked into it, you will look at you know, strategic insight and maybe say, actually, it's no good just thinking this, we need to do something with this, you can attach the action directly to that strategic insight. And we're going to do that in just a second. You'll see as well, just by the way, that the this strategy board is, so when you're getting used to the system, I always advise people to use the strategy board as sort of a navigation view, because you can see it'll tell you in this little sort of grayed out text here, it'll tell you what you have and haven't done. So it gives you a sense of progress as you've gone around. And you can use it as a sort of navigation and orientation thing while you're using it. You'll see that those same 5 things are listed down the main menu here. So you don't always have to go back to the strategy board and navigate your way forward. You can use the menu as sort of a quick routes into various things once you're more familiar with how the whole tool hangs together. The other thing, before we actually get into some meat of this, is because I appreciate that, you know, strategy is a relatively complex concept to get your head around by itself. And for a lot of people, trying to get your head around the strategy concept and learn a new system is just a bridge too far. So we've really worked hard to try and build as much help into the system as you can. So just to give you a sense, so you'll see we have these little pop-ups. You know, this is like pointing out something and telling you what it's for. And particularly when you're new in the system, you'll see a lot of those. You know, you'll start to move past them fairly quickly. You'll see a lot of those. So it's worth just paying attention to those. You know, just read it, click got it. You'll see most of the time as well, you know, if you're not sure what something is, most of the time, if you just hover your mouse over it, you'll get a little pop-up telling you what it is. So, you know, we've tried to make it as engaging as possible from that perspective as well. We've also got this help menu. So at any point in the system, whatever concept you're dealing with, if you click on the help menu, you'll always find a link to a blog article explaining to you what the thing is that you're doing, what its role in the process is and how to use it, and giving you some tips and good practice. And you'll also see, for example, that you always have access wherever you are, sort of with 2 clicks, to the how to use. This is the dummies guide to StratNav app, if you like. So if you haven't read the how to use StratNav app post, then I'll definitely recommend it. It'll tell you a lot of what I've just told you now, to be frank. But it's always there for you if you sort of need that refresher. You'll see we've also just recently trained a sort of chatbot based on all of that help text. So if I go and type in something very simple like what is a SWOT analysis, you know, it'll, now, hopefully you all know what a SWOT analysis is, right? But you can try it for yourself. You can type in something more complex, and it is conversational. So if I then follow up and say, how do I identify my strengths? It'll give you a pretty good steer, because this is trained on the actual help context for StratNav app. So it's giving you a pretty good steer on how to do all of these things within the context of StratNav app. I mean, you can ask it, where do I find, or how do I navigate to something, and it should be able to answer most of those questions. So it's up to you. You can either use the help menu at the top, or just ask the chatbot, and hopefully it'll tell you everything you need to know. Right. The one last thing before we dive in. People, for some reason, I haven't quite got my head around, but for some reason, people get confused about the idea of what is a project in StratNav app. So I'm going to do my best to explain it. So the simplest explanation is each project is one strategy board. So for each project you create, you get a brand new strategy board that you can fill in. In simple terms, I would suggest you think about it as one project is one strategy. So I, as a consultant, will have typically one project for each engagement I do. If you are if you're a large business, you might have one project for each of your operating divisions. If you're a small business or a startup, you may only ever have one project, and that may be enough. You may never need to have another project. Although you may want to just fire up a project anytime you want, just to play around with an idea. So you may have your main strategy that you're working with, but you may say, look, I just want to explore an idea on the side for a while. So just fire up another project, and you can do that to your heart's content. You can even have a sort of playpen if you just want to familiarize yourself with some concepts before you do it live. Each project is entirely self-contained, except for a small handful of exceptions, which I'll hopefully tell you guys about in a little while. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into a model, and I'm going to pick SWOT just because I think everyone knows what a SWOT is. And you see, it's a very simple card-based interface. I can start typing something in, and if I hit enter, it'll create a new card. I can drag these cards around and sort them and move them between categories. It's the kind of thing that you could see yourself doing in a workshop or a small meeting, right? You could say, guys, let's get together and talk about this aspect of the organization. You can see yourself doing a quick and dirty on doing that. But of course, and again, this is where a lot of corporate strategy processes go wrong. They never go beyond that. So they come up with a couple of simple cards, usually some yellow Post-it notes on a whiteboard somewhere, and they never get any deeper than that. Now, because we're dealing with a repository-based system, we can get deeper than that. So if I click on one of the cards, you'll see it'll open up some information behind that. So this is quite a common UI structure for StratNav apps. I'll just explain it very quickly. So the first thing you've got is the title, is basically what you had on the card. Then you usually have a free-form formatable edit box where you can add your supporting evidence and insight and explanations and everything that goes behind to substantiate this point. And you'll see you can put in tables, you can put in pictures, etc. In addition to that, you will most often have some structured data or some structured elements about the particular thing that we're talking about, in this case, the strategic insight, which you can change appropriately. And the system will know then what to do with this based on this additional information that you give it. On the right, the way I usually tell people to think about this is everything on the left of these pages is going to be part of your strategy. So if you imagine you're producing a strategy document, hypothetically at the end, everything on the left is part of that. Everything on the right is sort of meta information about it. So we could have a chat about it, and let's say we were all working on a project, and I might say here, Simon, I thought I saw updated stats which contradict this. Yeah, whatever it is I want to say, right? And I can post that, and it'll appear in a sort of a stream of consciousness, if you like, about the material on the left as we're thinking about and developing it. So you can use it as sort of an asynchronous communication protocol for talking about the strategy. And ultimately, what you would hope is that as a result of that conversation, someone at some point would go in and actually update this insight with the new and enhanced insight. It will also keep a log, by the way, every time someone changes it. So you will see, I did this earlier today, actually, just in preparation for this. You'll see it saying that on the 12th of the 9th, 2003, this morning, I changed this description, and if you scroll down, you'll see it's highlighted in green that I just added something. It says something I've added at the end. Very deep and meaningful strategic insight there. But it'll keep a sort of change log so you can see who's done what, which is really useful, because if I log into this and say I need to get my head back around this particular topic, and I see something and say, well, how did we get to that conclusion? I can go over here and I can see, it was Barry who changed that. I'm not sure I agree. I need to get back to Barry and say, Are we sure about this? I'm not sure. So in that way, you can provide all that information about and behind the strategic insight on your SWOT or any of the other models, and the details on the screen will vary depending on which model you're working with. But I can also then link it to other elements. So, for example, this strategy, by the way, that we're looking at, this demo example, is nominally Uber. So, we're talking about the strategic insight here is that, this is a strategic threat that business travel might not fully recover after COVID-19. And I can link that, for example, to this group, which I've called customers who are away from their home or car, which is a particular group of people that Uber might be interested in. So I've linked that. And the way I do that is I just go into the, say I want to add linked groups, and I go and then I start typing a group. I'm not sure what groups else I've got here, actually. Or I can select from existing groups. I could say this is about car manufacturers. It's not. Or I could say it's also about customers who don't want to drive to a party or function. So I can have these groups that this insight is about. These groups will be the same group. For example, if I go to the business model canvas, oops, it's warning me that I haven't saved that particular note. I'll just go and save that. So if I go to my business model canvas, there you'll see those customers away from home or their car are a customer segment on the business model canvas. So it's got that enforced, I'm going to use the term enforced referential integrity for those of you who kind of get that concept. But it'll make sure that everything across all of your models will always stack up. And if I click on the customer segment here from my business model canvas, it'll tell me everything we know about that customer segment, and it'll tell me it's linked to 3 strategic insights. And all 3 of those we will find on the SWOT somewhere as well. So it's forced that referential integrity in both directions. So it's not duplicated. It's so you could have created it from either end. You could have created it from the business model canvas, in which case it would have known it was a customer segment because you put it in the customer segment block on the business model canvas, and it identifies that as a group. A customer segment is a group. Right. Essentially. So, it's got that kind of logic built into it. If you'd gone from the insights and said, I want to connect to that group, it wouldn't necessarily have known it was a customer segment unless you went in here onto the detail and selected the customer segment thing. But as soon as you said it was a customer segment, it would say, well, if it's a customer segment, it ought to be on your business model canvas, because that's where your customer segments go. So it'll take care of that for you. And in fact, what it's trying to do is it's stopping you, if you like, from building a strategy which isn't logically consistent, because it's logically inconsistent strategies which end up in all sorts of confusion. So it's forcing you to do that. Now, you may find that slightly uncomfortable at first, but I would think of it almost, it's the system challenging you back and saying, well, if you're saying that's a customer segment, it should be on your business model canvas. If it's not on your business model canvas, perhaps you're saying it's not really a customer segment. I've shown you 2 models. I think there's about 15 models built into the tool. They all integrate and overlap in the same ways to help you build a more cohesive and rich picture to build your strategy forward. I can't show you them all, unfortunately, in the time frame that we've got. So I'm going to move on. We can come back for questions a little bit later. Once you've built all of this, of course, now you say, well, what do I do with this? So there's a couple of things that you can do. So the first thing, ideally, you have gone in and you have shared this project with the team that you're doing the strategy with, so that everyone is in the tool and making their contributions, and the tool is keeping them up to date, and it's feeding them by overnight emails and various other prompts. It's feeding them the updates to keep everyone on the same page. But of course, you may be working with people who aren't part of your core team and then aren't in the tool, and you need to get this information out to them. And there's a number of ways that you can do it. I'll just go back, let's just go back into the SWOT. So first of all, you'll see there's a little button at the top of the screens here, which says download as an image. And if you click that, all it'll do is it'll convert that SWOT. It'll remove the entry box, because obviously you don't want the entry box. So it'll remove the entry box and convert that as a PNG image, which you can then paste into your email or a Word document or a PowerPoint document or whatever else you want to do with it. So that's one quick way of just sending an update to someone if you don't want to do that. If I was in here as well, I could select print, and it'll effectively do a print screen, but it'll get rid of all the menus and all of the navigational stuff and just give you the content as print, which you can then print to a PDF or something. But the sort of where you really want to get to is our reporting module, where it'll show you in the report options here all of the models and frameworks that you've generated content for this particular strategy, and allow you to select which ones you do and don't want to include. And then you can generate either an HTML or a Microsoft Word report document containing just that content. So you may say, I just want to produce a report with the SWOT and all the details that go behind it. It'll pull it all together in one document, cross-reference with page numbers and all of that, everything, and it'll be ready for you to send. And you'll see those reports are customizable. So if you have a sort of corporate standard of colors and layouts and stuff, you can use that, and it'll just generate the content into that corporate standard for you. So the report module is your sort of main final output if you want to use that. Of course, what I'd really like is you just continue to work in the tool and manage and execute the strategy within the tool altogether. I should show you as well, because I mentioned it. If I just go back into analysis, I'll just go back into that one because we've looked at it. So you can, as I mentioned, you can add sorry, just the screen updating. You can, for example, add actions to almost anything in the tool. So you can say, look, we've got a strategic insight. We've got something. So this was about the possibility of business travel recovering post-COVID. You can go and type an action in here and say, Chris Fox to formulate a market research study proposal within 2 weeks, and it'll create an action there. And if I click on that action, you'll see it's identified a due date. It's I appear as 3 different stakeholders in this project. That's an anomaly. Apologies for that. It's attached the stakeholder to it, so I'll know now that there's an action against that particular stakeholder with a due date. And the tool will help me manage in the governance module all of the actions on this project, highlighting which ones are due and which ones aren't, and who's responsible for them. So from a getting things done, you can use the tool to drive action. Are we progressing this, or are we just talking about this? Are we actually doing things? Right. I'm going to show you 2 more things quickly, and then I'm going to close for questions. So the first one is, I just want to show you some of the stuff that we're starting to do with AI, and it also allows me to show you how you start a new project. So we've been working on this project for Uber. I'm now just going to start a new project just to show you how easy it is. So I'm just going to click Create a New Project. It's going to start off with a very simple wizard asking me a few questions just so we get the project set up right. So I'm going to say this is a new strategy for an existing business. I'm going to pick Tesco just because I think everyone knows who Tesco are and it's relatively easy to spell and type. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to select the default project name. So the tool here is, it's come up and say, if you're developing a new strategy for an existing organization, good place to start is with a pestle analysis. Gives you some instructions, gives you some links to get more help if you're not familiar with what a pestle analysis is. Just get rid of that. And you could start doing your pestle analysis now. But what we're working on is, for example, it's saying, if you don't want to do that, you can ask our Stratbot. And if I click on the Ask Stratbot, it's going to go away and do a little bit of thinking. Just give it a few seconds to do some thinking. Now, it's got, so at this stage, the only thing I've told it is that the company I'm dealing with is Tesco. And the AI has gone away and says, well, I think I know who Tesco is, and it's come up with a description of Tesco. Because Tesco is relatively well known, that's easily a good description. If it was a less well-known organization, I might have to go in and edit that a little bit. But it said, okay, so we know who Tesco is. I'm happy with that as an explanation of what Tesco is. And if I press continue, it'll think a little bit longer. I have timed this. It's never thought for more than 29 seconds. That's the longest it's thought for. So just chat amongst yourselves while we wait for it and see how long it takes. So what it's doing at the moment actually is it's collecting data from elsewhere in this project, of which there isn't any. So that part would have been instantaneous. Well, no, it would have had to look still. That would have taken a couple of split seconds. And it's chatting now with ChatGPT to ask it questions which the system has formulated to ChatGPT. And then there you go. It's taking and processing the answers, and it's come back with a not bad pestle analysis. Now, I think we're all smart enough to know that it's only AI. It's not going to be all of the insight you would need to do a fully fledged strategy for Tesco, which is obviously a big and complicated organization. But as a starting point, and I'm particularly thinking as a consultant, right? I'm going to go and speak to, I've got my first meeting with a client coming up, right, for an organization I'm unfamiliar with. I don't want to look like an idiot. So I'm going to do this, and it's going to give me some pointers for where to go. And so if I was going into a client, that would be the first thing I do. So because of the overlap between pestle and SWOT, the elements on the pestle will feed through onto the SWOT as well. Right? Because basically the elements on your pestle are the threats and opportunities on your SWOT. So, you know, conventional wisdom, if you read HBR, you would do your pestle first, transfer the pestle onto the SWOT, and then you would do the strengths and weaknesses relative to the external environment, opportunities and threats, rather than in their own right. So it'll fill them on your opportunities and threats. Right. So basically, it's gone to ChatGPT and said, you know, what are the things in each of those 6 categories that we should worry about? What are the implications of them for Tesco, being the business description that we just gave it? And do we think it's likely to be a net positive or a net negative impact? That's essentially what it's done in the background. And I would then, once I was happy that I had that correctly, I would then go and say, okay, let's look at the organization now. You've got to get into the organization to do it. You can't do it without without talking to the organization. And so the more information you provide in the strategy, the more prompt context it'll have, and the more information you'll get. And remember what I said. All I've done so far is say it's Tesco.
Yeah.
If I'd said more, I would be getting answers. So the other one that we can do is I would go into the competition thing, and again, you know, I mean, everyone knows who. Oops, hang on. I've got to keep moving bits out of the way. Everyone knows who Tesco's competitors are, I hope. But again, you know, if I was going into a new organization, a new client, I would ask Stratbot to see if it can find me some of the competitors, and I would go in with the pestle and the competitors in my back pocket, so that I would be having a meaningful first conversation with my clients and their stakeholders, rather than I know nothing about your business, start from the beginning conversation. This one will actually go into a little bit more depth, which I'll show you if I can just keep waffling on until it finishes thinking. So here it's come back with all of the competitors. Again, I can decide for myself whether I think that's the right risk and add to or change or remove it. I can also click on one, and I can say, so give me an overview of this as an organization. Oops. and it will go away and write me a neat strategic summary, again, within the context of whatever information I've already told it, of Waitrose. And so we'll be building a lot more of this capability into the tool going forward, but certainly as a starting point, going in to see a new client or just getting your head into a problem space, that's going to give you, yes, it takes about 29 seconds each time, but that's a lot faster than I can do it. And frankly, the output is better than if you assigned it to sort of your Office Junior to do it for you. So here it's come up with an explanation again with some strengths and weaknesses within the context, which, you know, again, I would imagine when you're doing a fully fledged project, you would want to get into more detail and you want to amend that with something more insightful. But again, as a starting point, it's you know, I've been playing around with it quite a lot recently, and it gives you a really good foot in the door to get things done. And you know, Simon, we've talked about doing it for lean canvases and business model canvases as well. And you know, as a suggest me a starting point because I've drawn a blank. I think it's really powerful, and I think it's the kind of thing that you can do because you've turned your strategy from, going back to the beginning, from an ad hoc collection of PowerPoints and Word documents into a structured system out of which you can construct intelligent questions and prompts and build things that integrate and align. These sorts of things become possible. There's a whole bunch more stuff I could show you, but I'm conscious of time, and I've already taken longer than I'd anticipated before we get into sort of more questions. So I'm going to stop there unless anyone's got a, well, I'm going to stop there and throw it open to questions.